Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the day one of Mastercard Sustainability Week 2022. My name is Andrea Pražáková, and I lead Mastercard Foundry, ESG, and Gaping for Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I will be your host for the next 4 days. So over the next 4 days, we will be deep diving into sustainable innovation. We will be discovering the magic of our carbon calculator tomorrow. We will be unlocking the power of ESG in space. And on day 4, after being in space, we will come back to Earth and we will, go to Uganda and Kenya and take a look at how community pass empowers farmers. Our first 60 minutes, which is today, we will discuss the explosion in the world of innovation. We will exchange views how sustainability is being shaped by the new ventures in retail, metaverse, AR, VR, and understand sustainability in science. So please do post questions in the chat and Q&A. I will take the questions in as the time goes. I will see as the speakers will be speaking and also in the end of the session. So with that and further ado, I'm super delighted and excited about my panel members today. So first of all, thank you very much all for joining. I'm really delighted to be joined by Malva Carlson. Malva is a sustainability coordinator at the Houdini Sportswear. For the listeners who don't know Houdini yet, Houdini Sportswear is a progressive outdoor company based out of Stockholm, Sweden. And what they do, they together with scientists, artists, and designers, and adventurers, of course, because it's a sportswear, they are truly pushing the boundaries of how outdoor clothing is made and teaching us as consumers to build a really strong connection between us and the nature. Malva, his responsibility, she's driving Houdini's ecosystem towards circular and regenerative future. So Malva, great to have you here. Thank you very much. My second guest is Andrew Merry, PhD. He is a head of future at Planethon and a sustainability scientist. And Planethon is truly amazing company. If you go and Google it, it's very impressive. So often you would say a phrase, I'm not sure if you, but I definitely do, saying, I wish I had a crystal ball to look what will happen. And I think that in a nutshell, this is a little bit what Planethon is doing. They really look into future, but how they do it, they say that they are building a data platform for science-based foresight. It is absolutely fascinating. They use technologies in data analysis to bring decision material and capabilities needed for keeping up with scientific development and how our planet operates, and urgent actions are needed. So great to have you, Andrew. Really excited. Our last guest is my dear colleague, Katarina Wanga-Björk. And she's an impact lead as Mastercard Sustainability Lab. She joined us from Duconomy, who will be hosting tomorrow. In the lab, obviously, we are focusing on development, practical application to empower businesses and consumers and transform how we produce, distribute, and purchase products. When I was researching Katarina, I came across a really, really interesting insight. So she actually started her journey in 1997 at the COP3, where she was a youth delegate. I thought it was such a, amazing that such an early age, she was shaped and stayed in it in her whole career. And I hope that Katarina will join us in Dubai for COP28 next year. Wonderful to have you with us, Katarina. So let me just start immediately and go inside. So before we go into the sustainability question, I would like to hear from each of you. Maybe start with Malva. How did you get involved into sustainability in that sector, and what is your current role with Houdini?
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's very nice to be a part of this discussion with the great other people that are here. So very thankful. My current role at Houdini, as you said, is to be the coordinator in the ecosystem that we call Houdini. So being a part of the circular and regenerative journey that we are on together at Houdini Sportswear. And I have my feet kind of in the offering team, working with the social sustainability and CSR, as well as being a driver and coordinator towards this journey, and with a lot of holistic sustainability projects. So you asked about why, and why in this business working with sustainability. So I started to study at the Swedish School of Textile And then actually with the thought of that the textile industry and the system are broken. So it is a 3 trillion take and make and waste industry where a lot of garments are being produced and end up in usually landfills. So this was kind of the starting point why I wanted to work in this business and to actually change the world, or being a part of changing the world. And also adding that I have a background with doing a lot of adventures in the nature and feeling this connection, and how can we move closer to nature.
Amazing. So Andrew, when I looked up at the Planethon, I was really puzzled and filled with incredible amount of curiosity, because I saw that Planethon collaborates, for example, with Spotify and creates audio experiences of the future 50 years from now. Can you tell us a little bit more about Planethon, and also, expand on what is the role you're doing and how it interacts into sustainability?
Sure. So, I can describe Planethon, start off with, we are a transformation partner, and we have this real kind of mission and drive to try to work with how do we, work with other organizations to create these more planet positive futures, ones where people and planet are considered together. And that's the intersection of like business and innovation and what's going on the planet. And we do this through combining sort of research, data-driven insights, and also sort of collaboration processes. And then more specifically, what I do is I'm working in the futures space, and connected to what we did with Spotify, is to really combine like science and storytelling as a tool to then work out like, okay, what does the future look like, and how can companies and organizations respond to that? And to recognize also that there's many different kinds of futures that can happen. And often, if you just kind of take science and sort of throw it and take it to a company and say, look, here's the science, use it. Many companies are confused with like, well, I don't really know what to do with this, or what, how do we make sense of this? And so combining this sort of storytelling approach and using these narrative future scenarios is a really great way to kind of embed that science in a story, and then be able to kind of use that as a way for people to start thinking creatively about how they can, if they want to head towards this more preferable future, okay, what do we need to do today to actually help us to head in that direction? And this comes from my real passion and background in science, and having the opportunity to come across all these incredible insights about how the world is changing, but not wanting to stop there, actually wanting to bridge the gap between science and business, and really work out like, well, how do we take those and do something with them? So the whole approach is sort of informed by that idea.
Amazing. And I think it's a good link, because you worked with us as well to create the Sustainability Lab in Sweden, and where Katarina obviously comes from. Katarina, we spoke a little bit about your journey. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about the Sustainability Labs as well, and how does it all fit in?
Yeah, so the Mastercard Sustainability Innovation Lab is based in Sweden, but it's a global one. So focus on delivering or exploring new service and new products, and de-risk those for Mastercard. So it's about finding services that would help enable consumers and corporates, businesses, to become more sustainable, to make everyday choices that are more sustainable when it comes to consumption, for example, but also, of course, as you said before, production and the distribution of the services and products. It was launched, at least the thought, a year ago, and then finally launched this spring or in June. And we've just set a team to start up and have a lot of exciting initiatives and projects to go live. The ambition is to find products and services that could go live and be commercialized within 2 to 7 years. So we have both a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective. And we also do a lot of thought leadership. So I think from when I started to look at what could business do within the sustainability field in year 2000. And that was like quite many years before the Paris Agreement, before the Agenda 2030, and business wasn't really at all so inclined to do anything at all, because you couldn't see really the benefit of being sustainable, and there wasn't really regulations in place either. So I think there's been a long journey to come where we are, and we need to accelerate that journey to reach net zero, and also to approach all the other limits that we have in front of us or already passed when it comes to planetary boundaries, for example.
You mentioned about, what happened in 2000 and where we are today. And I think, Malva, you mentioned that 3 trillion of waste. And I want to come back to you with that point, because basically that's one of the big challenges. Can you maybe elaborate? And today's topic is innovation, right? So can you maybe take us a little bit on the journey, and please, then Andrew and Katerina chip in, you mentioned the 3 trillion and maybe other challenges. What are some of the challenges which you see, especially in the retail industry? And how are you innovating? And what are some of the advice you could give others who are from the same sector? How should they look at the innovation in sustainability?
Yeah, so as I was saying, the textile industry, or the industry that we are in, is a 3 trillion take, make, and waste industry. So somewhere between 80 billion and 150 billion garments are produced and sold globally each year, and 60% ends up in, like I said, landfills. And this is of course something that we want to change, and we want to shift the mindset of how we can look upon this. And for Houdini, we have the goal of becoming 100% circular, and we have been designing for circularity since already 2001. So this, I think, can be an advice of how to look upon circularity. So it's, first of all, of course, our products. How can we make products that are long lasting, that are giving humans the opportunity to go out in the nature and experiencing it, but also how can they be circular? But it's not only the products, it's also the systems. So how we are working towards other companies, or how we're working with knowledge. And I always want to stress the importance of looking at the nature. So how does the ecosystem look? It's actually a really, really good system that doesn't have any waste. So it's working with the circular loops and the feedback loops. And I think looking at that holistic view that the nature have and the loops, how can we learn from that? And I think that's something that the industry can learn from, and also how governments and how we set up the world. So a lot of mimicking the nature and looking at the fantastic system that's already there.
Katerina, what is your take on the challenges, and how are they addressed through innovations? If you can maybe bring some examples to play as well.
Yeah, I mean, in innovation in general, I think there's loads of challenges to approach and problems to find solutions for. And in the innovation lab, we've looked at how can we enable 3 billion people to make sustainable consumption choices through activating the Mastercard ecosystem of businesses, of academia, of consumers, you name it. So finding those, looking also at Mastercard's business ecosystem and see how can we approach system problems at the right spot, because it's also important to select a point where you look at services that doesn't end up in a solution for sustainability and business at one place, but end up in a lot of problems at another place. So having a systemic view on your innovation is important to bring in, and that what is something that we need to do and try to do in the innovation lab through our methodology, through to be stringent to our methodology, and through to understanding the problem and challenges, but also the business opportunities, because we need to both future-proof our businesses, but also our ecosystem business partners, so that they're viable even in a future, a sustainable future.
And I think that you said the word future, and I think that's a perfect word for Andrew, because I think, Andrew, you utilize the data of today, obviously data from the past, and do predictions, right? How would it work from today onwards? what are some of the learnings and challenges and innovations in that space as well, in terms of how would you advise a company, how do they structure their sustainability strategy if you work with the data? Because I think it's such a strange topic that, predict this utilizing insights and data. So I think it's really fascinating.
I would say that I think that one of the things that's really common in foresight approaches is that many things are difficult to predict. And in fact, what we're often doing in terms of combining like data and storytelling is to try to actually build the capacity of people within the organizations to become futures literate and actually understand how things are changing. And if they are working on, for example, now, like a solution like a carbon calculator or working with offsets, how can they kind of use future perspectives to work out, okay, but that's only a small subset of the larger set of environmental issues. And what you're using is only a very small kind of sliver of tools. So if we understand that the future is going to change in these ways, then you can start working out how do you actually build a more systemic perspective. Because we know that, for example, one of the major challenges, of course, is some of the sort of innovations that might support addressing climate change might be have other kind of negative effects when it comes to biodiversity or deforestation or replacing kind of native forests with kind of plantation forests. So you have all these systemic intersections that are really important. And I think the future is a really great way to kind of explore that, to make sure that you actually, yes, use the data from science about this is the way in which the world is changing, but then kind of, then how do you build strategy around how you're going to act on that, I think is really important. And of course, we know that technological innovation can play a really, really critical role in addressing many of these things, but in the same way that, what they do in the Mastercard Innovation Lab is something we're obviously really in support of, is that you need to think about how is innovation ecologically and socially literate, and how can you use kind of the future as a way to kind of help you navigate through those things. To also make sure that the data from the past and the present doesn't give you a blinded view of what the future might be.
Exactly, because I think that's a very sensitive topic, right? To say, because how we behaved in the past is not really the right direction towards where we're going forward, especially with a Generation Z who over 80% today are very sustainable conscious and obviously making different decisions. We spoke before we started about children. Our kids obviously act towards sustainability very differently. And going back to the investments, I think, Andrew, you mentioned a little bit. Katerina, I mean, we saw in the latest Bloomberg report that there is, by end of this year, will be about $41 trillion invested in different kind of sustainability and ESG initiative worldwide. Do you see any really major trends in which parts of the sustainability these funds are going?
Yeah, so far what I've seen is very much going into clean energy and renewable energy, and that could also, of course, be wide spread, looking at different regions depending on what type of energy mix we have, because that varies a lot. So I would think, but looking at the Nordic region, solar is exploding at the moment, for example, and I think there will be investment also in nuclear, looking at globally anyway. So a lot is going in there. A lot is going into mobility, so new ways of transport, and then I think banks and other VCs, etc., are looking through their portfolio. How can you help different sectors to decarbonize, and how can you enable new new techniques in cement and other CO2 intense industries, and enable both inventions, but we have also a lot of inventions. So it's very much about scaling and commercializing the solutions that we have, and also looking at regulations, looking at what is coming through regulation, what will be stimulated through regulations, and then steer investments through those trends.
Malva, you mentioned obviously how consumers should be more sustainability conscious, right? And the amount of waste which is coming. And I think, usually in the past, in the retail industry or in the fashion industry, it will be 2 collections a year, a summer and a winter, right? Today, fashion houses publish 8 to 10 collections a year. Now, even though obviously there is a big notion of we now using sustainable materials, because sustainability is obviously not only about materials and the heritage, but how does it, if you look at Houdini, how do you balance that hunger for scale and more profit with that consciousness? Because it somehow doesn't go hand in hand, right? Because as you grow, obviously, and you're pushed by the industry to produce more collections, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think something that a lot of people are thinking about. And for us, there is really no contradiction between sustainability and good business. Because in this world of, as you say, mass consumption, where quantity and frequency are often prioritized over good quality, our design and the design philosophy, it becomes something radically different. And we design every product with the intention of making it a difference for the end user, but also for the world now and in the future. And only by setting these examples, we can share our work and we can lead the way forward. And also it's a little bit about shifting your mindset, what value and good business is. So looking at the traditional way of making growth or good business, there is a lot of other values that we can take in and that we as business can give back to the planet. So it's about shifting the mindset of what true value is. And one example of this is that all the natural resources that we use, we see them as borrowed. So we are not owning them, we are borrowing them from the planet. So that can be one example of shifting your mind for what is value and what is good business. And I think it's very interesting that you're mentioning this and with the volumes and such. And we have, a few years back, we created this regenerative lifestyle initiative. So it's kind of a formula that is bringing the true impact of a company, or let's say a person, or you can put it in some different contexts. So it is stated the product times volume plus lifestyle, and that's the real impact. So looking at the product, let's say for yourself, what product did I buy? Is it secondhand? Was it produced? Or as a company, how are we producing our products? Are we producing them responsible? But then also the volumes. How big is my wardrobe? Or how much are we producing as a company? And then the lifestyle. So what values are we at Houdini giving out to the world and our community and our customers? We want them to live a happy, healthy life out in the nature. And how am I as a person living my life? So that's when you see the whole impact. And I think this lifestyle perspective is a lot about changing the mind of what is value and what good can a business do.
I agree with you. I think that, personally, I think once you start to go on that journey, it's really hard to go back, right? I mean, Houdini is one of the brands which does it really well. Another Tomorrow, it's another fantastic brand where you can scan the QR code inside your garment. Like obviously with your company, it tells you where is it produced, where the sheep comes from, where the buttons come from, and I think that and then you can obviously resell on a secondary market immediately. So that kind of thinking, I think once you really taste it as a consumer, it's really hard to psychologically go back and say, now I don't care anymore, right? Because it doesn't, that I think it's once you start, and the new generation is really important about it. Andrew, can you give us, we saw that you work in so-called sustainability science. And can you bring alive what does it mean for company, maybe for some of the companies which are in the audience, or for a company like ours? What is sustainability science, and what does it actually practically mean to a bank, or to a telco, or to a merchant, or any kind of industry?
Yeah, so essentially, sustainability science is the science of a changing planet, and it's kind of built on this idea that we need to consider ecosystems and social systems as being interwoven. One of the major challenges I think we have in sort of sustainability practice now with kind of, for example, the ESG idea is that you separate environmental, social, and governance. And I think one of the key insights with sustainability science is like, well, if you consider all of those things together to make sure that the kind of decisions that you're making in, for example, the environment don't undermine human rights, but at the same time to make sure if you're focusing on social inclusion or financial inclusion, that you also make sure that you don't do that at the expense of cutting down the rainforest, for example. So there's that kind of holistic perspective. Katarina, of course, mentioned planetary boundaries, and this is probably one of the guiding stars of sustainability science, which is understanding that the Earth system has limits. And so we have to work out how to kind of operate within those limits to avoid crossing these tipping points. I mean, you mentioned a psychological tipping point that a consumer finds it suddenly very difficult to go back when they fundamentally change their behavior. And there's something similar happening at the planetary level, and sustainability science gives us insights into what happens if we cross those tipping points and how we can't come back. But what's really critical is that I think that sometimes it is also as much about having an opportunity space as a space of limits. Malva has mentioned regeneration, nature positive, changing the definition of value. So, we often know that the best kind of creativity and these transformative solutions happen when we operate within constraints. So if we recognize that this biosphere, this thin layer of life that supports all human flourishing, we only have one of those and we can't get it back if we destroy it, but it also means there's huge opportunities to kind of change things. So I really would urge that I think that the really key value is to say that these limits open up space for creativity, transformative solutions, new kinds of business models that are currently unthought about, and to not only think of it as a way that's trying to constrain what businesses do. But the reality is, if we ignore those findings, then we're going to put ourselves in a situation that makes it very, very different to have kind of, productive, prosperous business in the future. So there's many, many details, and I'm not going to go into those, but I always kind of relish the opportunity to talk about the different insights from science and how they can support companies. And then just one very practical thing to say, of course, is that many companies are working quite strategically and practically with these, for example, with the science-based targets, the exponential roadmap, and many of these things are built on the insights of sustainability science, and then our specific action pathways. And then, of course, at Planethon, that's what we want to do, is to help with companies and organizations say, okay, if we understand the science, what does that mean? How do we kind of activate that in our strategy today?
Going from science into almost science fiction, today obviously there is a big buzz around immersive experiences, right? AR, VR, XR, so mixed or different types of reality, and the metaverse, NFTs, and so on. And obviously we see a lot happening in the NFT space, especially around fashion again, I think, and that industry. I think we saw it with Nike, we saw it with Louis Vuitton, we saw it with multiple different brands who now use the metaverse to beta test products and put it out there, obviously, see what the consumers want, and then they take it into a physical production. And last week there was a report published by Business of Fashion in cooperation with eBay, which is called The Rise of Resale, and then still luxury as a currency. It was really fascinating in to listen how are you looking at it. So I would want to know. I start with Malva. Malva, how does Houdini look at utilizing maybe NFT, number one, from a provenance perspective, so that the whole circular economy is much easier to do, and also in bringing it into the digital space rather than always for the consumers buy the physical items?
Yeah, so we have in the latest time been collaborating with YKK and E.ON with a project that is looking at how can we extend the lifetime, as I was talking about before, the lifestyle in the formula. How can we make people care more about the garments and have a more maximum experience out in the nature. So we have been working with NFC tags in our zippers and QR codes in our garments. So it's still a physical product that you are having with you, but it's also opening up a new world that is more innovative. And how can we, from this platform, then make our consumers maybe resell their product and track and see, oh, this is the life that this garment actually had. It was on a lot of adventures, and this is what I did with the garment. And how can that add value then in the next step of being resold or rented out to someone else? Or how can I even repair and take better care of my garments? So that is something that we are experimenting with and seeing how can we explore this lifestyle part with our consumers and with the digital platforms.
You know, Katarina, I would put a twist on it from the retail itself, where Malva is in more into gaming, right? Because I mean, everybody who has children or is gamer themselves, they understand what does it mean to. I can see Andrew is gamer, purchasing skins, right? And Roblox also published obviously a report. I think it's 1 month ago that just in a year, just in one game, there were 64 million items sold of clothing and accessories, right? And that's a huge consumption, obviously. And about 25% of the players will be exchanging the garments, I think 5 times every month, which is really fast recycle. Where do you see this innovation going? And it's not only obviously in garments, but it's in multiple different aspects, right? I think it's cars, it's houses, it's many things in terms of pushing boundaries of sustainability and bringing some of these experiences, which might be even short-lived, outside of a physical world into the virtual world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of course, virtual experiences. If we could switch material experiences made of different materials into virtual ones, even though they might consume quite a lot of energy, providing the virtual experiences. But if we could switch from material experiences, either it's buying clothes or traveling and being in places or whatever, and experiences this at home, we could reduce a lot of emissions, for example. But also, I think there's a lot of both reductions when it comes to become more material efficient and energy efficient. Also, we can use it to de-risk different types of productions or creatings of innovations, for example, to try it and to test it in, as you said, in virtual environments, but also maybe in, I know there's a lot of experience where you can try to walk a plank. I mean, and probably much more fun if you're a kid doing other things. You could use it for testing and developing and learning experience, but also maybe instead of traveling to different places to experience places without actually going there. Then I also think there is, I think in terms of sustainability, there is both the thing of de-risking and making things efficient by not using materials, but also exploring the futures that, for example, Andrew developed. So try to envision those futures and make it tangible and positive and meaningful, so that businesses want to do their sustainability work, or citizens or individuals want to consume differently to enable a new, or vote differently to enable another future that is more sustainable than the one we have now. Because often I think when looking at futures in general, they painted in quite dark colors when we talk about sustainable futures, not about meaningful experiences where you actually want to live. So I think it's about creating an experience from a positive narrative.
You know, you mentioned about corporate and what Andrew is doing. Andrew, you know, I understand that many times you apply so-called planet-centric business design. can you elaborate it? What does it mean if I, as a company, would like to obviously embark on this journey and start to apply the planet-centric business design? What does it mean for me?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most critical things is that the design of business models and also innovation pipelines are often completely separated from sustainability. They operate in two different tracks. Sometimes they come together as they're trying to do in the Sustainability Innovation Lab, but often not. And planet centricity in terms of the business design is trying to think at the absolute foundation when you're coming up with a new business model or a new innovation, to think about not only what is the implications for sustainability in the sense of it being a more negative sense, but also what are the opportunities. I mean, you just talked about kind of gaming companies and NFTs and augmented reality. And I mean, there's so many interesting ways that you could bring this into, for example, multiplayer experiences where you bring in sort of nature experience from the rainforest, or someone is kind of going out and connecting the world that they're experiencing in a game to the real world. You could have, for example, business models around items that when people buy, a certain percentage of that value goes towards funding like restoration initiatives in different places. So you sort of actively make it about your sustainability investments built into it. Because we also know that a lot of this is, if you build kind of innovations that don't have this planet centricity built from the beginning, it's often very hard to kind of build that in later. Or it can be an accusation of greenwashing because it's not kind of built into the DNA of what you're developing. So I think that's really the core idea. Like, what can you, and of course, the futures is a really great way to do that. I mean, you talked about de-risking innovation. We talk a lot about kind of using narratives and storytelling as a way to simulate and test out a bunch of different ideas. You can explore really wild kind of planet-centric business models and then sort of work out like, okay, if we then take that into our business today, what could we actually do? So I think it's really about shifting the sort of philosophy and then very quickly getting into kind of really hands-on, like, okay, if we were to keep these things together, planet and people and innovation, how would that look different to what we're currently doing, and how far short are we falling in terms of our work being able to contribute?
You mentioned something in the beginning which really resonated with me about how almost risky it is to use the data from the past, right? Because our behaviors are not really the ones which should be driving the future decision. So I think the question to all three of you, and maybe I start with Malva, is in your future strategy, how much do you involve in your ideations the new generation? Because obviously they think slightly differently. So how do you involve them to create what you're doing forward? I mean, and I would love then also Andrea and Katerina to answer, because I often think that we sit in a room and we are not the users of tomorrow, right? So how do you do it? How does it work?
Yeah, so at Houdini, we have a strategy that is going pretty far into the future. So we know how we want the future to look with this fantastic world and the positive energy that we can get from there. And we don't always know exactly the stepping points of getting there. And I think that's also important, to leave creativity, because the world is changing and the new generation is coming. And that's kind of the way of the path that we need to go. So we know that we need to have this holistic view, but still the stepping stones are not straight for the future. So, and I think that leaves space to get new ideas, new innovation, to co-create and to bring in the next generation.
Andrew, how do you in the work which you do, how do you involve the generation of for tomorrow, right? To help you to shape what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about, I mean, you can tap in to, climate justice movements, a lot of what climate activists are doing, and many people in different things, and trying to, so I think that there's the opportunity to actually run more participatory futures projects with companies where you make sure to bring in representatives of those, but also to think about like, okay, how do we also shift that the future generations have maybe more power than they do today, or if they were to have a stronger ability to kind of make decisions, how would that how would that shape things? And again, because often, we do have this sort of legacy perspective of thinking that a lot of the way we do business and do politics is based on what we've done in previous generations. And I think that, yeah, it's really important to bring that in and really explore, like, okay, this would actually, if we were to bring in, and it's about like bringing in the youth of today, and then also thinking about bringing in 4, 5, 7 generations perspective, and how would that influence what you're doing today, and how would that make, we often talk about that one of the things that can be really powerful is to think about the perspective of the future. What would they think is completely absurd now? Like, what would they laugh at or think is hilarious, or look at us and be like, how could you do something so stupid or dangerous? And being able to take that perspective also from future generations can really help to kind of wake us up to the certain ways that we continue to do things. So I think it's both about including kind of the people of the current and next kind of future generations and youth perspectives, but also actually bringing the perspective of future people more seriously into the decisions of today.
Yeah, I like it. I made a note. It's almost like living on the edge, right? With the thinking. It's very good. Katarina, I know that we're doing partnerships as well already with universities in New York around space and ESG. What is the way forward with the sustainability lab, and how do you plan to involve the generation of tomorrow into whatever you will be creating?
Yeah, we work, as you say, in ecosystem, both in terms of the business model of Mastercard, but also in terms of partnerships with academia and NGOs and other organizations. So and we are in touch with some youth movements and youth organizations, and I think we should develop that even further, and also have. I'm bouncing ideas now, but there's various ways we could have different types of advisory boards and have participatory workshops, as Andrew said, and various ways of involving and engaging coming generations. So, but the first and easiest one is to organize with organized youth that have a saying and have ideas.
Yeah, I really like
also,
what Andrew said. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, of course, also, we work a lot with customer and consumer research to have those groups, of course, represented in the research that we do in various ways. That is key, but I think that has always been key for a company like Mastercard and for the Innovation Lab to have all the segments that are in scope in future, especially when it comes to sustainability and the business and services of tomorrow.
In all the businesses, which if you look around ours, obviously retail, and even in business industries, and we always are part of some kind of ecosystem, right? Some customers and suppliers, and Malva, in your space, how do you choose the right suppliers? Because obviously your brand is on the display for the customer, right? But in the back end, you somehow guarantee that this is the right supplier, right? He doesn't use child labor. He takes the material from the right space. He, has 50% female, employees. How do you select the right partners with the right criteria?
Yeah, to start with, we are talking a lot about that we want our community and our customers to feel comfort for body and mind when using our products. So that's exactly what you're talking about. It shouldn't just feel comfortable wearing, it should also know that the workers that have been sewing your garments have a living wage and have a good life, but also that it's not harmful for the planet. So it's absolutely a part of our work. And our partners at Houdini for sourcing fabrics, for example, and manufacturers from sewing, but also other business partners are based on a very high selective partnership strategy. So with long-term relations. And for most of our suppliers, we have had contacted with them already from 2001 when we started. So it's very important with this partnership to know that we are there for each other, we are backing up, and we are working towards the same goals. both for the environment, but also socially and with ethical standards. And we are, for the manufacturing, mostly working within Europe. So that is actually pretty local when you talk about the garment industry, to ensure that we can have this close relationship and work together going forward.
Interesting. Andrew, what is your view around, this extended part of the company sustainability strategy and the whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's critically important, and it's worth, talking about like collective action and collective impact. We can't do these things alone, and we need to work together. And this is becoming, of course, more and more as kind of there's a lot more regulatory pressure to take care of things much beyond your own supply chain, but it can also be extremely valuable. And I think that changing the kind of understanding of what is competition and what's collaboration, I think is really important, to realize like you cannot do everything yourself, and you don't have to try, but you have to be willing to kind of move beyond your comfort zone, work with maybe strange alliances or different groups of organizations that you're not really used to working with, and to also find new sources of ideas for how to kind of create transformation. So, and this is something, of course, also is a major insight from sustainability science about all of these new models of collaboration, of sort of science-based business partnerships and other ways of really, like I can just give a very quick example. There's something called Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, and that was kind of a science-based initiative that started off and brought together the 10 largest seafood companies in the world who were had an impact on nearly 50% of the world's ocean ecosystems. And the idea there is like, well, if these organizations can come together and work out how to collaborate, the chance to actually really shift things massively is much, much more outscaled. And you can, of course, see in the fashion and textile industry that there's huge potential for those kind of very big collaborations. So it's about collaboration at all scales, I think, is really critical. And that's how we're going to be able to really shift the needle and create big impact in this space.
You mentioned also, the big role of government. And Katerina, how do we partner with governments? Because obviously the legislation, and in Europe we have some great examples as well. How important is the partnership with governments? How can we influence and help them to make the right decisions in terms of legislation, so that all what Andrew and Mava were describing can happen going forward? Because it's obviously both ways, right? It's from the corporate out and from the government in.
I think it's very much about understanding regulations for us and for businesses, and also to be a bit future oriented, what might be coming up in order to plan for, because business need long-term perspectives. So that is also important signals to governments, to national governments, even though most large decisions when it comes at least for European legislation is EU oriented, but we still need communication on a governmental level. Then I see that Mastercard has a strong experience when it comes to enabling cities, understanding footprints, but also that Mastercard works a lot with digital inclusion and urbanization, and looking at how can we help and activate ecosystems in cities, which is really important as cities are the places where people are moving to, and we have a heavy urbanization the coming 30 years. So I think about 70-80% of the global population will live in cities quite soon, which means maybe in Europe we don't have many growing cities, but other places we have, and that's a huge potential to actually explore and develop sustainable solutions for cities in those places. Right. So that is huge. And also in terms of mobility in cities, they're very much connected to what is happening in cities and growing cities, but also how can we include sustainability in those plans and provide data on how citizens and also the cities or national spend and connected to, for example, carbon footprint or water footprint or whatever. enabled to create collaborations with different stakeholders, either it's business, cities, or consumers, citizens, to create new innovations, etc.
Yeah, I really like the thematic around the mobility, right? Because today I think there is a lot of around car sharing, for example, so that people trying to minimize the impact of cars, and it's somehow working, but not there yet. But I think it's just a leap away when the cars will be truly self-driving, where you will have a digital app where the car will just come to you like in iRobot, right? So it will be much more smoother. The user experience once the user experience is easy, the adoption it's also will be growing much faster. And then I don't think if any of you, but I would not need a car, because if I can share with whoever car is around, and that has dramatic impact, of course. And if you move to electric cars, we talked about partnerships, and we have probably many people in the audience who come from the EEMEA region. Is Planethon, what kind of partnership Planethon is already doing in our region, if any?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we don't have any partnerships in the region yet, but it's definitely something that we would love to explore. And I think that one way to actually say this is that, one of the things that's really interesting from a futures perspective and connected very closely to innovation is there tends to be an idea often that it's kind of transfer of innovation from the Western world to other places, especially, historically to the continent of Africa and other places. And I think what you're seeing now is a shift in the dynamic where a lot of the kind of newest ideas, innovations, new ways of doing things are coming, exactly from this region. And so I think that one thing really important to kind of work with that space and not assume that just because Silicon Valley has been like a major source of innovation in the past, that that's going to be the most exciting source of innovation in the future, particularly when it comes to sustainability. And we know people in many different individual countries within Africa and the Middle East are already innovating around how do you change your lifestyle to adapt to climate change? What are the new technologies that we can do where we are already facing kind of water shortages? We're already much more adaptable to what the future is changing into than many places in Europe or the United States or elsewhere. So I think that there's some really fascinating and important work to be done in connecting sustainability and innovation through sort of these future scenarios and thinking about how would that look differently, and how can that challenge a lot of the kind of dominant ways of thinking about things in the space? So I would, love the opportunity to kind of work with some of these really forward-thinking companies in the region.
Yeah, our region is definitely forward-thinking. That's for sure. If you think about and put yourself into shoes of a business owner or a product manager or a senior manager, you name it, and you're thinking about how to incorporate sustainability into your strategy, and because many times it feels so high up, right? So what are some of the key practical steps when looking at sustainability and innovation within my existing business? Because Andrew, I think you said it's easier when you're starting from zero, but once you have existing business, you almost reverse engineer it. What are some of the components which you feel one should look at? Katarina, I will start with you.
If I would start with the business model that I have, I would look through the business model and both my supply chain, what is there to reduce and innovate in each step of it, and how can I make sure that if I procure material stuff that I have, I could put pressures on my suppliers, or as we talked about before, collaborate in order to create a more sustainable supply chain in that case. But I would also look at how does the market look like? What does my consumers or my market segment look like, and what are their demands now and in the future? And is it really so that they want material stuff, or are the needs and wants swifting? And also, are there other segments that I haven't really supplied yet with my products or services? And how can I do that in another more sustainable way or less unsustainable way? Finding new business models. So very much looking backwards and also looking forwards and seeing what opportunities are there in delivering a new value proposition that doesn't take as much material into account as it does now, and also that diminishes transports, etc., in order to fulfill whatever need there would be or I'm serving. So I would say collaboration, as we said before, both Malva and Andrew, and also collaboration both along the supply chain, but also in terms of the sector that I'm in, to set common standards, because that's not easy either, and to be collaborative on that and not competitive in order to leverage the whole sector to go to a more sustainable way of delivering business.
Andrew, what would you add to what Katerina said? Obviously, she spoke about collaboration and the whole ecosystem. What else do I need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, one thing again, I think I'll just mention it again, is I think the kind of science-based targets initiative is a great kind of starting point sometimes, but even they, I would admit, or many companies who've started it, think that it's still kind of a narrow view. And I think one of the things that can be interesting, if you think about from a science perspective, is that in fact, taking off a little bit the carbon blinders, or if you're kind of dealing with like some really big challenges, like, I don't know where to start, sometimes thinking about biodiversity or water or deforestation or other kinds of things can actually open up new ways to see the way that you're actually doing business and work out how you can make big contributions that maybe are quite sort of unexpected. So there's different ways that you can, by having this more sort of holistic perspective, it can give you kind of different entry points into actually being able to create change that are maybe different to what you would have expected. And so therefore you can understand yourself, your place in your sector, and where you can best make contributions kind of in the short, medium, and long term. And then if, again, using futures as a strategic tool can also help to clarify, okay, what elements of my business model do I need to change like really now? What other elements are going to take longer to transform? What needs to die in order for new things to emerge? So it sort of gives you sort of a strategic map to kind of help you to work through that process.
You know, I like what you said, because at Mastercard, obviously, we have two major commitments. By 2025, we committed to include 1 billion people financially and to plant 100 million trees. And I think, as you said, if you set the goals on the corporate level, it really trickles down to every single action. And I think one of the great anecdotes, which I just experienced last week, was that we have a reward system for employees if they, partner on the project. And now if you partner, we plant a tree. And it was so delightful to see the employees writing back and saying, oh my God, it's fantastic. You planted a tree for me because I worked on the project. And it's even these small little things which building the empathy and the focus within the whole team, I think, are brilliant. Malva, last question to you is, from a consumer perspective, if you say the three things which the consumer of today can change or should start to do tomorrow for us who are on the call.
Yeah, so I would like to go back to the lifestyle again, as I tend to do. And we at Houdini have had a challenge. That's our 10 garment challenge. So it was, I can give it as an example of what you can do. So last summer, we had a challenge for our community to only wear 10 garments for the whole summer. So having these 10 garments and see how can I actually experience my life and even have this maximum experience with less. And we call it live large with less. It doesn't mean that you will live a smaller life, rather you will live a larger life, but with less clothing or with less things. So I think that's live large with less could be some of my last words to share.
I like it. There is two questions in the Q&A. One is more a request which we will attend offline, but one is a question by Paul Silverman. He says, did you think about how hospital can and must reduce their carbon footprint? It's a lot of work out there. The only problem, nobody really knows what is 1 ton of CO2. So anybody wants to take that? How can a hospitals look at how to reduce their carbon footprint?
I think it's a hard question, but I mean, as with any business, it's again to analyze where are the hotspots, where do we have the most emissions, and to understand how can we do that in a more efficient way. Then I think personally that well-functioning welfare systems is the most important to have a sustainable and to world. So we need to have them functioning, and if we need to prioritize, we should be more create more allowance there in welfare systems rather than in other areas. But in general, analyze and understand the footprints, and also, of course, as 1 kilo or 1 ton CO2 emission equivalents, it's not really easy to understand if you don't know so much about climate change and haven't studied how it looks and how you quantify emissions. Right. And I don't think everybody needs to understand the details of it, but I think we need to create a higher awareness when it comes to climate change, right, and climate literacy to enable action in general.
Amazing. And I think that's the right way of looking at it. We are on time. I would love to continue talking to you, but unfortunately we are just 1 minute over. With that, I would like to thank you all, Katerina, Andrew, Malva. You were an amazing panelist. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Please give us feedback on LinkedIn, on any other social media. And tomorrow we will be actually talking about carbon calculator and carbon footprint with Eco and with Duconomy. So if you are interested in the carbon footprint, please do join us. Same time tomorrow, same login. Once again, thank you very much, Malva, Andrew, and Katerina. It was a great pleasure, and I look forward to the audience to join us tomorrow. Have a lovely day.